everyone, and welcome to another episode of VIVE Influencers. Today, we have a very special guest, Cathy Hackl. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I think you bring very positive energy the moment you're here, so very excited to do this. So why don't you tell us about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so I am a tech futurist with deep expertise in AR, VR, spatial computing, and the metaverse. I've been in the industry for almost 6 years now. And yeah, it's been an exciting roller coaster. A lot of people know me from some of the work I've done with some of the companies, but also from some of my Forbes writing. So yeah, it's been kind of a really exciting journey.
How do you become a futurist? Does you just one day decide, hey, I'm gonna think about and plan about the future? Is there a job description you sign up for? How does that happen?
So I heard the term many years ago, and I was like, that sounds like me. I think that might be me. I had never heard the term futurist until one day I heard someone say they're a futurist, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? So then what I started to do is started to research what does it really mean to be a futurist. So there's a whole academic background. I've been trained in strategic foresight, which is the discipline of futures. I went to the University of Houston, did the training there. They've been teaching strategic foresight there for wow, like more than 30 years. So there's you can call yourself a futurist, but there is an academic background. There are frameworks, right, for strategic foresight. So I do want to kind of preface that I call myself a futurist, but I am a certified futurist in the sense that I'm academically trained in foresight. Um, and in essence, really what a futurist does is kind of, we kind of see around corners, we look at all the trends and the things that are happening and try to make sense of them, try to make connections and try to understand the second and third order effects, right? So when we think about a futurist, futurists don't predict the future. That's the first thing. I always tell people that if I could predict the future, if I had a crystal ball, I would be doing this interview from my private island next to Sir Richard Branson's, which I'm not. I'm in DC, not on a private island. So futurists don't predict the future. What we do is we deal in uncertainty. We look at the potential futures, right? So a true futurist will speak in plural. They will not say future, they will say futures because we understand that many things can happen and there are many potential futures ahead of us. So yeah, I'm all for people calling themselves a futurist. Like if you feel that term aligns with who you are, take it and run with it. But there's also a whole academic background and a whole discipline of sorts when it comes to strategic foresight.
Very cool. You're legitimate futurist. So why don't you tell us about a brief background of your life journey and the choices that led you up to this point?
Yeah, so I come from working in media, kind of a media background for more than 15 years. I started off my career in broadcast. So did documentaries, worked for CNN, worked for Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, you name it. I was nominated for an Emmy in 2007 for some of the work I had done.
Very
And
cool.
then eventually I transitioned over to more of the corporate communication side. I got to a point where I was just kind of like, okay, I don't want to keep doing, broadcast. I want to kind of transition more into corporate side. So I went into corporate communications. And then through my time in corporate communications, I got more aligned with tech. My first foray into technology was really live streaming. Back when it was like 2015, 2014, it was around the time that live streaming kind of started to come to the market, like Periscope. That was kind of Periscope came to market, a company called Meerkat. We were doing live streaming. I kind of started doing more of that work in the live streaming space. And then through live streaming, really that's kind of where I got introduced to virtual reality and augmented reality. And then I did a very hard pivot about 6 years ago, and I have not looked back ever since.
Were you one of the streamers in the early days?
Yeah, I was streaming. I was one of the I don't know what number, but I was one of the first people on Periscope. Very much involved. I mean, organized a community conference that Periscope came out in like March of 2015, and we organized a giant community conference in September with the help of Twitter. I mean, it was just amazing. It was a really great experience. But that catapulted me into VR and AR.
That's very cool. What kind of content did you make when you were streaming?
I mean, it was interesting because it would be everything from just join me for this. This is what I'm doing, or just conversations with the audience. So it wasn't back there. It wasn't like gaming. It wasn't Twitch, but it was more like, talking about business or talking about how to use Periscope. I do a lot of work with brands. So I've always spoken to brands about how can you use these technologies to, to extend your brand or, or to have value. So that has always been kind of my audience in some ways. So it's been interesting, but I think in VR, I always tell the story because people always like, how did you get started? And like all of us, I'm sure you have that story of like the first time you put a device on, right? For me, I have to take it kind of is all linked. I feel like even though, there's a lot of twists and turns in my profession, I do feel like it's all linked. So back in 2004, I was working at CNN, and part of my job there, not the only thing, but part of my job there was to look at all the raw footage that was coming in from the war in Iraq. So I always say that I was kind of like a Facebook moderator or a YouTube moderator before they existed. So you have to, part of your job is to sit through really horrible things. And when you have that type of job, you kind of have to turn your humanity switch off a little bit or just dial it just to go home and have a regular life.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't until about 6 years ago when I went to a conference, I was speaking about live streaming there, and I got invited to put a VR headset on, and it was a VIVE. It was one of the VIVEs. I put an HTC VIVE on, and I went into an experience called Confinement by The Guardian. And it's an experience that puts you in a very small solitary confinement cell in VR where prisoners spend 90% of their time. And, within a couple of minutes of being in that experience, I just felt claustrophobic. Something came over me. And the only way I can describe it is like that switch got turned back on, right? Whatever had been turned off got turned back on. And that was the moment where I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but this is the future of storytelling on some level. And, it's been kind of a wild ride since that first encounter with VR.
So it's like an epiphany moment. And did you, you were working at a company at the time. What was that transition to what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I started to kind of just connect with as many people as I could in the industry. I was very lucky that I had many people to look up to. I am Latina. I'm a, Latina woman in tech. So I had, Noni de la Peña, the godmother of VR, to look up to. I had Evelyn Miralles. She used to run the NASA lab, the VR lab at NASA. She's now at University of Houston. So I had women like me that I could look up to. And that to me was very powerful because if you can see it, you can be it. So they became, at first it was just like me admiring them as North Stars. They've become friends and mentors along the way. But I had people to talk to. I connected with a lot of folks. Evelyn, for example, said to me, she said, look, you don't have to be an engineer to be in VR. There's going to be a need for many different people across different parts, of the organization, from marketing to communications to sales to product. I mean, not only devs and not only engineers. So that really inspired me. And I said, okay, well, what am I really good at? And then I started kind of figuring that out. And my first big break actually came with a small VR studio called Future Lighthouse. Future Lighthouse was a great studio, was around for a couple of years, producing like super high-end content with Oculus. We did the first cinematic horror series. We worked with even like Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger. We did, Snatch. So Snatch had like a TV companion. And we did kind of the VR piece for that, working with Rupert Grint, from Harry Potter. So we did just really amazing work. I was their chief communications officer. It was a small studio, but we did just work that was ahead of its time. And unfortunately, the studio, like many companies, in this kind of up and down of VR, couldn't raise enough funds. So we shut down. And that was quite sad. But when that happened, I had a chance, I had some time on my hands, and I said, I'm going to write a book. And I wrote my first book called Marketing New Realities, which is pretty much a book for communicators and marketers to learn about VR and AR. This is like 2017, mind you, like it seems like a million years ago. And along the way, this is interesting, along the way, when I was writing the book and just, connecting with a lot of people, doing work with startups, I actually got hired by VIVE. So I was a VR evangelist in the Southeast region of the US for HTC Vive.
And then how did you, because I believe now you're independent, right? Was that a leap of faith to become independent and, build your own personal brand? I'm sure that journey is not easy. And how was it scary? Was it just like you already had a lot of people waiting for you to do it? So it was an easy transition.
It was very intentional. Like I'm very strategic and very intentional in the things I do. So I knew, way back from 2015 that I was going to build my personal brand because I wanted people to hire me for me. Right. I wanted people to know who I was and to hire me for me. They wanted to work with Cathy Hackl. So I think that that's one of the things that I really focused on was how can I be strategic about this? How can I provide value? That's another big thing. A lot of people come to me and say, I really love your social, or I really love some of the articles you're putting out in Forbes. For me, it's about, providing value, providing that thought leadership. I'm very lucky that I've been able to become, one of the few female voices out there speaking about the metaverse. It's normally it's been a lot of men, but I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to be one of those female voices out there speaking about the metaverse. So much so that, 60 Minutes just interviewed me and I'm going to be featured in one of their episodes where they're covering the metaverse and NFTs and Web3. So yeah, it's been, it's been exciting. It's been very intentional. One of the things I'm looking forward to is launching a personal brand accelerator for different people in technology, men and women that kind of want to just really focus on their personal brand and make money while they're doing that. It's not an influencer course. It's more about how do you leverage your personal brand to create value and to eventually be hired for who you are. So yeah, it's been, it's been very exciting. But what I would say is my time at VIVE was very exciting. It was a time during the partnership with Ready Player One, with Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One. It was a time of growth for the company across the US. I learned a lot. I was very lucky to work with some amazing folks like Alvin, for example, and just, learn a lot about VR. It was my first break was at Future Lighthouse, where my first big, VR job was at HTC Vive.
Yeah, that's great. I wrote a book also on gamification. And I remember it took me 1 year to write most of the words and another year to make it a legitimate book with all the cited sources, all that stuff.
Yeah.
For your first book, how long did that take you?
Yeah, I mean, it took a little bit less because I had, a lot of time on my hands, and I had a brilliant co-author. So when I reached out to my co-author, Sam Wolf, she now teaches at NYU. I said, hey, I have something. It's not quite a book. It's more than 100 pages, but it's not quite a book. Can you help me give it form? And she really kind of took it and just built it really into a book. So I don't think I could have done it without her. But it did take, at least 8 months. With my second book that just came out, it's called The Augmented Workforce: How AR, AI, and 5G Will Impact Every Dollar You Make. That came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's already a bestseller in several categories on Amazon. That one took a little bit longer because my co-author and I both, changed jobs and both moved. And then the pandemic, I mean, a pandemic will make you rewrite a whole book.
Yes.
A lot of the things we wrote, got accelerated. So yeah, it was, it was quite an interesting experience. So not for the faint of heart, you would agree, I'm sure.
For sure. What did you want to do when you were growing up?
So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. Like I wanted to be an anchor or a reporter on TV. That was kind of my main goal. So yeah, it became true. I did it. I got there. I did TV. I was in front of the camera. I was behind the camera. I did a lot of amazing things. And maybe it's because I arrived at that goal so early that I've been able to kind of pivot and change careers along the way and be very, very open to change. I think that that's one of the things where I've been able to kind of transition, right, from broadcast to corporate comms to going into tech. And, now, even right now, in my daily work, I would say I straddle two worlds. I straddle the AR, VR world, and then I straddle more of the metaverse, Web3, NFT, digital goods world. I'm kind of in between those two spaces, but I like it. I like being open to change. Starting to do some projects with space marketing in space, or space marketing. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about reinventing yourself. And at the end of the day, it's, I feel very lucky and very honored to be able to work on the projects I want to work on. right? I know not everyone gets that opportunity, but I want more people to get there and be able to do that.
I think that builds into your skills being a futurist and foresight, maybe not the formal training at that point, but just your innate ability. When you're younger, you have a goal, you plan for it, you get there, then you plan for the next one, you get there, you plan for the next one, you expand, you really see what's ahead, and then you figure out what it takes, what are the necessary steps that maximize the probability of getting there. So I think everything comes together in one smooth picture for the path that you took. So how do you make your voice stand out from the rest and just establish your brand on LinkedIn?
I think it's understanding who is listening to you, right? Trying to understand who is your audience and who's paying attention to what you're saying, right? Is it more industry insiders, or is it, in my case, it's a lot of industry people, but it's also a lot of brands. So, currently in this metaverse space that I do a lot of work in, I work with a lot of high-end luxury brands, trying to help them on, either launch NFTs or launch virtual collections, or trying to understand what is the future of fashion. So I think it's understanding who is listening to you. I mean, that takes time, a little time to do research to figure out, who's commenting. Are you building relationships with the people that are commenting? Are you reaching out to them? Are you responding to messages? But it's really understanding, like I know my audience, I'm not on Twitch, like I'm not a streamer, like I'm not a gamer in that sense. Mm-hmm. I game, but I don't stream it, right? But I know my audience is not a certain audience. Like Pokemon's audience is very different than my audience, right? So I'm very clear into who I'm speaking to and how I speak to them in terms that it makes sense to them. Right. So you can see that a lot in my Forbes writing. I write for the Forbes CMO network, which is the Chief Marketing Office network. Mm-hmm. So it's very different. I don't write for Forbes Tech. I write for Forbes CMO. So I'm always talking about brands and extending brands into the metaverse and how can brands use it, because that's the audience that I speak to, that I write for, and also the audience that hires me to do projects with them.
Without giving the 5-hour lecture, can you explain what is the metaverse and where do you think we are in relationship to becoming a reality?
Yeah, I always start from like back here, from the past in some ways. And futurists are historians about the future, but we also learn a lot about from past, from what happened in the past. So, Web 1.0, connected information. So you got the internet and all the good and bad that came with it. Mm-hmm. Web 2.0, connected people. So you got social media and all the good and bad that came with that. And then Web 3.0, where is kind of where we're at right now, connects people, places, and things, right? And those places and things, and even people at times, can be virtual. It doesn't have to be only physical. It can be virtual. It's a convergence of the physical and the digital coming together. It's about these shared experiences. I like Kevin Kelly when he says it's when the world becomes machine readable, searchable, likable, that sort of thing. And it's interesting to me because when people think metaverse, they immediately, for some reason, their mind goes to a dystopic idea of the Oasis, right? They immediately go Ready Player One Oasis, which was a great book, great movie. But they tend to go in that very virtualized world. And I always ask them, why do you think Ready Player One and not Pokemon Go? It's kind of a bit of a spectrum, right? The metaverse is really big. It's a convergence of physical and digital. It could be a wholly virtual world, but it doesn't have to. It could be our real world with digital content on top of it. So, another way that I explain it to people, because people are like, is it the metaverse? Is it only one metaverse? Is it multiple metaverses? I don't, in my point of view, I kind of view it as, here in the US, we have something called like the Great Tri-State Area or the Great New York area or whatever, Great Metro area, which normally is encompassed by multiple parts, right? So I almost view it as like the greater metaverse. And then there's all these metaverses and meta worlds within that greater metaverse. I don't think one single person, and I don't think a single company should define what the metaverse is. I think we're all building it together. And who knows, in 10 years, the word metaverse might not be the word we use to describe this, this reality that we're going into.
Yeah, and I think it's like the difference between VR and AR, right? VR is going into the virtual world. And some people say that's a little like escaping the real world, just like Ready Player One. And or it's creating that environment that's necessary around you to complete whatever you need. And then AR is bringing those virtual elements into your existing world and enhance it or augment your reality. And I think the metaverse can facilitate both.
And to me, another way I try to explain it to people is that just because it happens in the metaverse doesn't make it fake. Because I hate when I read those articles of like, someone paid $800 for a fake dress. No, just because it exists in a virtual environment doesn't make it fake. This is a clear example I give everyone is, when I went to my first concert, I went to a stadium. I was in person. I saw a singer. I had my first concert. For my son, his first concert was Lil Nas X and Roblox. And just because it happened in a virtual space doesn't make it less real for him. He lived it as real. And during this pandemic, you probably had meetings with family on Zoom. Mm-hmm. You probably had a Christmas call, or who knows, right? Even though it wasn't in person, it didn't make it less real for you. You still have memories from those experiences. And I carry that as well. When I go into social VR experiences and I see my friends in VR, I live those experiences. I for example, I went to the Steve Aoki concert in Oculus venues. It was real to me. Like I was there dancing. It doesn't make it fake. And I think that that's a bit of a mindset change that needs to happen for people to understand the metaverse. Is just because it happens in a virtual space or just because an item exists only in a virtual space, it's a virtual good, doesn't make it less real.
I think it's a generational paradigm shift. I remember in 2004, when I first sold something on eBay, got paid in PayPal, I was telling him this, and my father said, that's not real. Like, I said, no, look, it's in my PayPal. I was like, well, it's in your PayPal. Can you get it to your bank? And eventually I did. And he's like, look, it's in my bank now. I was like, huh, okay. So I was very surprised. And then I make friends online, right? I wrote a blog, and my parents were saying, those are not real friends. Those are just random people, like randoms on the internet, digital people. And I said, well, and at the time I was running my startup. So one of my blog readers actually reached out and invested $50,000 into my startup. And I said, that's pretty real, right? And like, oh, that is real. These are real people, right? And so back then, the paradigm shift is, money, at least on things like PayPal, selling on the internet, meeting people, those could be real friendships, those could be real money, those could be real selling, right? And now everyone, takes it as a given, but then there's a new paradigm shift that every generation moves forward of what they consider fake. It's like, oh, well, that's now a given. That's just, of course, the world works like this. So I'm very excited about how that continues to shift. Do you think the metaverse will mostly be defined by companies that are existing today? They're pretty established, or do you think it'll mostly be defined by companies that haven't been formed? We don't know about them yet.
I think it'll be a mix. I don't think I've been this excited about some startups in a long time. I think the big players will still be a big part of it, right? Facebook, Amazon, all the big FAANG companies. Like, I think they're all going to be involved. They're all investing a lot of money on those technologies and in the future enablement of the metaverse. But I think, you'll see, for example, Roblox as a player kind of like growing up and becoming more important, bigger part of the psyche. I think you'll see startups as well, just doing amazing stuff like Genies and Zepeto are companies that do 3D avatars that have had really great growth. I think it'll be a combination. I think fortunes will be formed in the metaverse, and companies will be, big companies will be created, will be created in this kind of shift that we're going into Web3. So I don't think it's going to only be big tech. I think it's going to be a combination. And some of those smaller players today are going to become big tech eventually.
Yeah, I once heard someone talk about how the internet, for instance, the technology is inevitable. It will be invented, but whether it is all available, accessible to everyone, that was not inevitable. It could be just privately owned. It could be for wealthy people or just the government, right? But it just happens, we're lucky in this timeline, someone just said, yeah, I think this is great. This should just be accessible to everyone, and just kind of gave it to the world, right? And I think for the metaverse, just like you said, it probably wouldn't be defined by one company or even two companies, right? It's a group of
I don't think humanity wants it to be defined by one company or two, right? I think right? So I think it's part of that.
Yeah, so I think that's a strong thing. I think that connects to the overall theme of a blockchain, cryptocurrency, in the sense that it's decentralized in a sense. And it's not one central controlling of how everything works, how everything's connected. Great. So what's something you're proud of in your life that isn't obvious to others?
I mean, I think some people know that I'm a parent, but I've got 3 kids, all under 10. And that's a lot. That's a lot of work. So I'm very proud. I think that's what I'm the proudest of, is setting an example for my girls and for my son, and just showing them, that then mommy can do it. Just like daddy can do everything, mommy can do everything, and just be successful, and for me, it's about, also, this is something I tell people when I say, what advice do you give others? I said, people are watching. Someone's watching you. I have 2 North Stars. Like I have Kara Swisher and Amy Webb are my North Stars, like the 2 women that I look up to that are that's where I want to go. But to someone, I'm their North Star, right? I never really thought about it until someone said that, but someone's watching. You might be the North Star for someone. So make sure that what you're doing, what you're leaving in the world is good. Make sure you're enabling other people to be successful. So that's one of the reasons I created the Cathy Hackl Scholarship for Women with the VRAR Association. That's one of the reasons I became a limited partner of the Women XR Fund, because I want to give more women and minorities a chance to be part of our XR industry. And, how can I do it? How can I enable it? Well, those are certain ways that I personally can do those things to enable it.
I have twin daughters that are 3.5 years old, and maybe one day they'll benefit from the work you're doing. They'll see you as inspiration and see how they can make a difference in this world.
Yeah.
Are your children also into the things that you're into, VR, AR, metaverse stuff, or they're like, that's grown-up stuff?
They're all into Roblox. They love Roblox. My oldest one is really into cooking. So she's more into like physical things, but she does like the, culinary food science, which I find very interesting. So I think she'll combine food with tech some ways. My son is definitely a gamer. He's definitely into everything Roblox, and they always want to do VR when they can. And my little one, I mean, she's still figuring it out. She's only 5. But yeah, it's they're an interesting combination for sure. But they do think, I have to say, they do think I'm cool. Which is great. I'm still the cool mom, and I'll take that any day.
Yes, we do think you're cool.
Yeah, wow. If you can sustain that for as long as possible, that is a great feat. That is
and there's one of them.
Yeah, there's a cliche that if you want your kids to there's a cliche that's like says if you want your kids to stop wanting to do something, it's you get involved and they start to think it's lame because mommy or daddy likes it now. But I think you by being cool, I think that's a great thing going forward. I think you're setting a great example and being a good role model. Great. So what's a piece of content that you wrote or created that you were extremely proud? You're like, this is going to be big, this is exciting. And then unfortunately, it wasn't appreciated as much as it should. And you think people should go check it out today. Could be just a blog post or article.
What I would say as far as piece of content, when I was at Future Lighthouse, we worked on an experience called Melita. It was about an AI helping a scientist in the Antarctic. And, I wish that more people had been able to see that piece. It was on the island of VR. It was in Tribeca, it was in a few other places, but I wish more people had seen that experience because it was way ahead of its time. Like we transported, people would fly and like in the experience, and the way that it was done so well where people weren't getting sick. And, it was kind of really groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking, beautiful storytelling in VR, and it was ahead of its time. And, I wish that more people had seen it. The people that have seen it usually remember it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I remember Melita. But I think that's one of the pieces of content that, that I wish more people had seen, that was, I wouldn't say it was underestimated. It was just not available to a lot of different people. And it was a beautiful piece.
Yeah, I love seeing those hidden gems and things that were ahead of its time. And then now we're in the future of related to that time, but then we have the equipment to go and appreciate it again. We just have to know it's there for us to discover. Great. What are some top unexpected lessons you have acquired in the past 5 years? Things that you didn't expect you would learn along the way?
I think my biggest unexpected lesson, to be honest, was the experience of getting laid off from Magic Leap during the pandemic. Like many people, I went into Magic Leap thinking it was the next Apple. I kind of feel like I got married to the company, like many of us did when we were there. And, a layoff is always something very, very emotional, very, it changes you. And, especially for a lot of us that were, that were very engaged with the company, that, really believed in kind of the future of the company, getting laid off almost in together, like over 1,000 of us together, just getting laid off. That was a big thing. And one of the things that did happen to me with that experience is, it was emotional and it took a while to kind of get over it. But I decided at one point, I said, look, right now, I don't want to get married to one company. I want to be able to work on projects I want to work on. I want to have multiple revenue streams. And that's something that I've taken to heart. I was so right after Magic Leap, I did go into AWS for a few months, but eventually I left because I was like, no, I want to do my own thing and I want to focus on my own business. And it's because of that. It's because I learned that, maybe it's good to have multiple revenue streams and to be involved in projects that, you're passionate about, and being able to be flexible and move from one place to another. So that's been really exciting for me. Now, I kind of divide my time between certain roles and I enjoy what I'm doing. And maybe one day in the future, I'll get married to a different company. There are a few companies that I would potentially consider working for full time. But for now, I'm just enjoying being a little fractional and a little, independent and just kind of doing what I want to do.
So what's the lesson takeaway that our audience can learn from that experience you went through?
I think the lesson is, be patient with yourself. It takes some time to figure it out. Sometimes things happen in your life that kind of make you figure it out. They push you to figure it out. But yeah, be patient with yourself. And try to, for me, it's always about diversifying nowadays. It's like diversify, have multiple revenue streams, multiple projects, because at the end of the day, if one falls through, you might have another one to kind of hold on to.
Right. Where do you think VR and AR would be in 10 years?
Oh, it's so exciting. A decade from now. People always are like, when is it? When is the moment that, the metaverse is going to happen? I'm like, well, it's going to take some time. It'll be in the next decade. One of the things I tell people is, when we move from phones into glasses, we're not talking about 100 people wearing glasses. We're talking about millions or billions of people wearing glasses instead of their mobile phones. I mean, the world currently does not have the infrastructure for that type of connectivity, right? We're going to need not even 5G, we're going to need 6G, we're going to need edge computing, cloud. I mean, there's so many things from an infrastructure standpoint that have to happen that are not here yet, right? So in 10 years, those things will probably be enabled. Those infrastructures will probably be, in place. We'll see really the beginnings of this truly enabled metaverse, right? It starts this decade, but in 10 years, we'll probably be more in that kind of world where we're truly, between the physical and digital. And I mean, I don't think we'll be fully there. I think that, still things need to move. There needs to be more things happening, but we'll be getting closer.
In that world, 10 years from now, what do you see your role as being in that world?
I'm excited about the future. I think I'm making a lot of interesting investments with my time and with my resources. I mean, I've had people call me the Guy Kawasaki of AR and VR. So maybe in 10 years, I'll be kind of where Guy was 10 years ago. So, and if I can accomplish that, then that's great.
Yeah, I notice you bring up a lot of role models, people that you look up to, aspire to, and you talk about, you're thinking, of course, some people might see you as that role too. So you feel like that's responsibility. What motivated you to just say, hey, I'm going to learn from these people, as opposed to, I'm just going to do things on my own and not really look at role models? Like what drives you? And have you personally pursued a relationship with a mentor, things like that?
Yeah. So what I would say is, even though, I don't want to be the Guy Kawasaki of AR and VR, I want to be the Cathy Hackl, right? So I think that that's really important, understanding like, you want to emulate people, but you want to be yourself. So definitely, I'm all for people going after it and doing their own thing. I think building relationships with the people that you admire, is very powerful. Like when I first started, my first message to Evelyn Marias from NASA was literally a message. She was doing a live stream with CNET, and I wrote a comment. And then, I just started, connecting with her, and I saw her in places, and I said, hey, I admire you. And started building those relationships. So what starts today could blossom into a mentorship in the future. So yeah, and there are people along the way that become your mentors without them knowing that they're mentoring you because of something they did or said. So I think that that's also important. Kind of really stay open to those little life lessons that you might not know that it was a mentorship, but it was. And having people in your life that will tell you things how they are, right? Especially, you're talking to a lot of influencers. So we get a lot of love sometimes. Oh, we get a lot of hate too, but, we get a lot of love out there. Our communities really, really like us. So sometimes it's good to also hear the other side and say, I think you should be doing X more, or I think you should be more realist about X. Because it brings a balance. I'm not saying overcompensate on the negative voices. It's not about that, but you need to have people in your life that kind of tell you the truth. And, in that case, it's usually my dad or one of my family members will say, I think you should do this thing more, or I think you should do this less. Not so much the haters online. It's more like someone that's honest and true and that knows you and that knows where you're going and that can be honest with you in that sense.
Well, I would assume the trolls on LinkedIn isn't as prominent as the trolls for our like YouTube influencers and all this stuff.
Not as bad. So I don't have it as bad. I will get people every once in a while. Like, I'm just like, how did this happen on LinkedIn? But yeah, I mean, I'll get them every once in a while, but it's not.
Yeah, I guess sometimes negative book reviews. I don't know if you have any, but I remember when I got my first 3-star review, it bummed me for 2 days. And I had to keep telling myself, but 3 stars isn't bad. 3 stars isn't bad. And then eventually I got like 6 months later, I think I got my first 2-star. And then and when you read it, it's like, did you even read the book? Your comment is like totally a misinterpretation or I don't understand. And then I think when I got my first 1 star, I think 2 years later, I already did the emotional exercise. So I just, whatever.
Yeah.
Did you have did you go through any of that journey?
I think so. One thing that I have done, and I learned this from Jay Baer. He has a book called Hug Your Haters. So one of the things I've done, especially with LinkedIn, because people have an identity there, like it's different, on YouTube or Twitter when people can be more anonymous. But on LinkedIn, where people have an actual identity, if someone comes at me or says something, like I will reach out to them. I will personally DM them and normally set up a call. Like I will literally set up a call. And you know what? It's been great. I've been able to hear other people's opinions. And, sometimes they still don't like me and not everyone's going to like me, and that's okay. But at least I have a chance in LinkedIn to be able to kind of hug my haters and say, okay, when I listen to your opinion, what do you think this was wrong? Or, I don't want to give them too much time, but I do want to give them a chance to express themselves, because sometimes people just want to be heard, right? Yeah. It's not sometimes a troll is a troll, right? But sometimes a person that puts a negative comment, they don't agree with you, they just want to be heard. So, I am very lucky that it is LinkedIn, where I spend a lot of my time, and there is more of an identity attached to it. So, I've been able to kind of in a couple of instances, do that. And, one of the instances, it was actually a misunderstanding. Like I totally misread this person's comment because English wasn't their first language. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, no, that's not what I meant. So,
Yeah, I can tell you from my personal experiences, when I engage the haters and when they turn around, they become the most enthusiastic fans, because they have all this energy, right? And this passion. And they somehow, for whatever reason, they, like you said, they want to be heard. They're like, oh, this is stupid. The author is really bad or whatever it is. And then you talk to them and it's like, oh, wow, like I feel heard and I feel appreciated. This was amazing. And they convert that energy into saying like, this is so great. And I think it's usually worth it. And sometimes I do it, publicly to respond to them in a polite way, because sometimes you can't turn the haters around, but you do it as a performance for other people who's watching, right? If they say, oh, you're so stupid, you suck, it's like, oh, would love to understand why, I address these things, can you explain more? And if they say, no, you just suck, right? Then everyone sees that and like, oh, clearly this person is just trolling and Yukai or whoever is addressing in a very professional way. So other people respect you more. But if you just sometimes if you just ignore them, sometimes people see as like, oh, see, like it probably isn't so good, and see the author doesn't even want to respond, so it's probably true. So that's something that I try to follow. Cool. So we're wrapping up soon. If someone only read one book from this point on in their life, just one book, and not including your own, what book would you recommend?
Oh my goodness, that's crazy. I don't know if I could choose one. I mean, I love The Signals Are Talking by Amy Webb,
Mhm.
because that's one of the first books I read when I was trying to understand what strategic foresight was. So, and I admire Amy. I'm very lucky to be able to be part of a Monday meeting that she holds and stuff. So yeah, I would say The Signals Are Talking by Amy Webb.
Great. All right, so we're going to wrap up. Is there any last things you want to tell our audience about? Feel free to plug anything you're doing, but just feel free to share whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of interesting content there. I post, a lot of my Forbes articles there as well. I write something called Metaverse Weekly, which is kind of a roundup of all the Metaverse news. It's a really broad swath of everything. It could be AR, VR, but it could be NFT, it could be blockchain, it could be Web3, it could be virtual fashion. It's really, really, really broad. So definitely, if you're interested in Metaverse and staying on top of like some of the things that are happening, it's a good thing. And then, yeah, just keep your eyes out for, if anyone out there wants to really accelerate their personal brand, just keep an eye out for my course.
Yeah, we look forward to that. For the audience out there, if you want to learn how to build your personal brand, go check things out. Metaverse, big thing in the future. A lot of people don't know what it is yet, or they just hear a little bit of it. I think a lot of the smartest people I know think it's going to define the future. So I think it's good to learn it early, get into the game early, become knowledgeable, sophisticated, so you get to play as a big part in that future world, whether it's 5 years from or 10 years from now. But for now, we're going to wrap up this interview. Thanks so much for giving us the time and sharing your great experiences and insights. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.